The moment my future mother-in-law flung the engagement ring I had painstakingly picked out at my face, something in me snapped. That was the day I ended my engagement. And what unraveled afterward left everyone stunned into silence. I'm a 27-year-old guy who grew up in a solidly middle-class family, the kind where money wasn't tossed around casually and financial security wasn't a luxury. It was a foundational rule of life. My parents worked hard to keep things steady and comfortable, but never extravagant. They drilled into me the importance of budgeting, being cautious with spending, and always preparing for the unknown. It wasn't always easy, but those lessons stuck with me. As I entered adulthood and began my career in the tech sector, I carried that mindset with pride, not shame. I met Grace, who was 25 at the time, 2 years ago at a summer barbecue thrown by a mutual friend. I wouldn't have gone if it hadn't been for Ethan, my best friend and part-time therapist, badgering me to stop working overtime and start living a little. I wasn't planning to stay long. I figured I'd eat a burger, make small talk with a couple of strangers, and duck out early to watch Netflix in peace. But then I noticed her. Grace wasn't the type to dominate a crowd or make herself the center of attention. Instead, she was perched at the far end of the yard, completely absorbed in sketching something in a weathered notebook. Her quiet concentration made her stand out far more than anyone trying to command the spotlight. Curiosity got the better of me, so I strolled over and asked what she was drawing. She smiled up at me, not startled or annoyed by the interruption. She explained it was a study of shadows falling across the garden's fence and flowers. Her voice was soft, deliberate. There was a calm confidence about her, a kind of gentle charm that felt rare. We got to talking. Hours slipped by without either of us realizing. By the time the party wound down, we'd exchanged numbers and agreed to meet up again. From the start, our connection felt natural. Grace had this subtle but profound way of turning ordinary moments into something memorable. She would share her dreams with me, like how she wanted to open a small community art studio where people could learn, experiment, and just express themselves. It was clear she wasn't chasing wealth or status. She wanted a life filled with beauty, meaning, and creativity. But in those early days, Grace mentioned her mother with a cautious tone that hinted at trouble. "She's intense," she said one night while we ate dinner at a little Thai place downtown. "How intense are we talking?" I asked, half joking, half worried. Grace sighed, toying with her food. "She's just really opinionated, about everything. My job, my wardrobe, even my friends. She always says it's because she wants what's best for me." At the time, I brushed it off. Everyone has some family drama, right? A protective parent here or there. I didn't think much of it, until I met Linda in person. From the moment I shook her hand, it felt like an audition. Linda's smile was tight, her eyes scanning me like I was a math problem she was trying to solve. She started in with the usual small talk, asking about where I worked, a mid-sized but successful tech company, my educational background, and so on. But then, without missing a beat, she went in for the jugular. "So, what's your long-term plan?" Caught slightly off guard, I answered as confidently as I could. "I'm hoping to grow in my current role and eventually start my own business." Linda's expression didn't budge. She turned to Grace and muttered, "Stability is everything. You deserve someone who can offer that." It felt like a slap in the face, but I didn't say anything. Grace looked uneasy, so I decided to let it slide. No need to start a war right then and there. But over time, I saw that Linda's involvement in Grace's life was far beyond meddlesome. It was suffocating. Grace had always dreamed of being an artist, but her mother had pressured her into studying accounting. Why? Because, according to Linda, art was a hobby, not a career. Grace ended up stuck in a job she loathed, spending her days crunching numbers and her nights doodling quietly in sketchbooks. Every time Grace brought up the idea of quitting her job to pursue her dream, Linda would guilt her relentlessly. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" she'd say. And it didn't end with her career. Linda had unsolicited opinions about every aspect of Grace's life. Her food choices, her outfits, even how she styled her hair. If Grace bought a dress Linda didn't like, she'd make biting remarks like, "You think that's flattering on you?" It was endless, and what bothered me most was how Grace never pushed back. She always brushed it off with excuses like she's just old-fashioned or she doesn't mean it like that. I tried to be the voice of encouragement, reminding Grace that she didn't need to bend to her mom's every whim. She was talented, intelligent, and capable of building the life she wanted. Chick thanked me for saying that, but it never seemed to spark any real change. As our relationship grew more serious, Linda's shadow began creeping into our space. She had this uncanny way of making me feel inadequate, even when her words were seemingly polite. Comments like, "It's nice you're doing okay for yourself," or "Tech jobs can be so unpredictable these days," always carried a hidden sting. Grace never defended me when Linda made these remarks. She'd just give me a look, a silent apology I had come to recognize all too well. Once, during a dinner with her family, Linda launched into a monologue about how real men are providers and how lucky she was to have married someone with true ambition. My face flushed with frustration. Grace said nothing. Later, I asked her, "Why do you let her talk to me like that?" "She's always been like that," Grace replied quietly. "It's not worth the fight." That moment stayed with me. I loved Grace deeply, but I began to see the cracks. Her mother's grip on her wasn't just an issue for her, it was bleeding into our relationship, and the more I tried to brush it off, the harder it became to envision a future where Linda didn't have her hand on the wheel. Still, I hoped that if I proved my commitment, Linda might ease up. That belief led me to save for months, to pick out a modest but meaningful ring, and plan a heartfelt proposal. It wasn't one of those flashy cinematic proposals you'd see in a Hollywood blockbuster, but in my heart it was exactly how I'd always imagined it. The ring I had chosen wasn't enormous or over the top. It was a sleek platinum band set with a single, shimmering diamond solitaire. Understated, elegant, timeless. I knew it was something Grace would love, not because of its size or cost, but because of what it symbolized: our bond, our future, and the intention behind every word I planned to say. Grace was never the kind to crave attention. She didn't dream of skywriting proposals or fireworks or flash mobs. What she valued was authenticity, intimacy. And that's what I aimed to give her. So I planned something that felt like us, a quiet, meaningful moment in a place that already held so many memories. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, I took her to the riverside park we often visited together. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was our spot. A tranquil place where we'd spent countless afternoons talking about everything and nothing. There was a particular bench that overlooked the water, tucked slightly away from the main path, where we'd sit and just enjoy each other's company. That's where we went that day. As we sat there, our conversation meandered through lighthearted plans for the weekend, maybe brunch at that place she loved, or a movie night at home, until my nerves began to bubble up. Heart pounding, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. I turned to her, got down on one knee, and opened it. "Grace," I said, my voice just a bit unsteady from the rush of emotion. "I love you. I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a split second I saw the world pause around us. Then she smiled, the biggest, most genuine smile I'd ever seen, and said yes. She hugged me so tightly I almost forgot to slip the ring on her finger. But when I did, she looked down at it like it was the most precious thing she'd ever owned. For a few magical days, everything felt perfect. Grace couldn't stop glancing at the ring, her face lighting up every time she caught sight of it. We began discussing wedding ideas, something simple and outdoors, surrounded by close friends and family. I truly believed we were in sync, building a shared vision of the life we wanted to create. Then, Grace brought up the idea of telling her parents in person and asking for their blessing. My stomach sank the moment she suggested it. I'd been dreading this moment. Linda, her mother, was not exactly fond of me, and I knew there was no way she'd keep her opinions to herself. Still, Grace seemed so genuinely happy about the thought that I couldn't bring myself to object. "We'll tell them together," Grace said, squeezing my hand with a hopeful smile. "Mom will come around once she sees how happy we are." I nodded, even though doubt gnawed at me. I wanted to believe her, but I knew better. When we arrived at her parents' house, Linda was perched on the living room couch like a queen on her throne, with her husband Mike quietly settled in a nearby armchair. Mike gave us a courteous nod. He was a gentle soul who rarely got involved when Linda was in one of her moods. Frankly, I couldn't blame him for staying silent. As soon as we stepped into the room, Linda's eyes zeroed in on Grace's hand. "What's that?" she asked, her voice sharp, already brimming with judgment. Grace, glowing with happiness, held up her hand. "We're engaged," she announced. For a brief moment, Linda just stared at the ring. Her face didn't move, didn't show a flicker of emotion, until she let out a laugh. Not a joyous, surprised laugh. It was a sarcastic, almost mocking one, that made the room feel 20 degrees colder. "That's the ring?" she asked, arching an eyebrow, as if we'd presented her with a joke. "Yes," Grace replied, still trying to hold on to her smile. "Isn't it beautiful?" Linda walked over, took Grace's hand, and examined the ring like a pawnshop appraiser. "It's small," she muttered. "Are you sure this is an engagement ring?" "Mom," Grace said sharply, her tone pleading, "don't start." "Don't start?" Linda echoed, now turning her full attention to me. "Adam, you're seriously telling me you couldn't get her something more substantial?" My jaw tightened. I'd prepared myself for passive-aggressive remarks, but this was more than that. This was a deliberate jab. I took a breath and responded calmly. "I chose this ring because it's meaningful. It's elegant and within our means. I don't believe the size of the diamond determines the value of the relationship." Linda let go of Grace's hand, crossing her arms with a huff. "An engagement ring is supposed to reflect your commitment. This looks like you were trying to save a few bucks." Grace's voice rose slightly. "Mom, stop. That's enough." But Linda wasn't finished. "I'm just saying Grace deserves better. If he can't afford a real ring, how is he going to afford a wedding, or a house, or children?" Mike, silent until now, tried to defuse the situation. "Linda, maybe we should just say congratulations." Linda turned and shot him a glare that could slice steel. "I'm just being honest. This is our daughter's future." I clenched my fists, swallowing my anger. "I love Grace. I want to build a future with her, one built on more than just a flashy ring. I'm not about to drain my savings on a rock when we have real plans to build." Linda laughed again, that same dismissive scoff. "That's a lovely speech, Adam, but it sounds like an excuse." Before I could get another word in, she reached over to the coffee table where Grace had gently set the ring and picked it up like it offended her. "If this is the best you can do," she said, tossing it back with a clatter, "maybe you're not ready for marriage." Grace went pale. "Mom, please stop," she said, her voice trembling, but Linda plowed on. "Grace, think about it. Marriage is a serious decision. You don't just say yes to the first guy who comes along with a cheap ring." That was it. I stood, every muscle in my body tense. "I won't sit here and let you belittle me. I love your daughter, but I won't be treated like I'm not good enough." Linda didn't flinch. "If you're serious about marrying her, prove it. Get her a proper ring. Until then, don't waste our time." I turned to Grace, silently begging her to say something, anything, but she just stood there, eyes glassy, lips trembling. "Adam, let's just go," she whispered. We left. The car ride was heavy with silence. At my apartment, we sat in thick quiet until she finally murmured, "I'm sorry about my mom. She's just protective." "Protective," I echoed, unable to keep the anger from my voice. "She called the ring cheap and threw it back at me. That's not protective, that's vicious." "She doesn't mean it like that," Grace said softly, eyes averted. "She just has high standards." That was Grace's explanation, as if it somehow justified everything her mother had said and done. I stared at her, dumbfounded. "High standards?" I echoed, my voice tight with disbelief. "Grace, she humiliated me, right in front of you. She called the ring cheap, questioned my ability to support you, and threw it at me like it was garbage. And you didn't say a word." Grace looked away, her eyes clouding with guilt. She didn't try to defend herself, she didn't even argue. She just sat there, silent, like she was shrinking into herself. It was the first moment I truly questioned whether love alone would be enough to hold us together. After the disaster at her mother's house, things between Grace and me were off. We hovered in this uncomfortable silence, neither of us fully addressing what had happened. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd deflect. "I'll talk to her soon," she would say, or she'd change the topic altogether. Days passed, then a full week, and nothing had changed. The tension in the air had settled like dust, constant and suffocating. Then one evening, Grace dropped a bombshell. "My mom thinks I should go stay with her for a while," she said cautiously as we sat on the couch, the television humming quietly in the background. I nearly choked on my drink. "Wait, what? Why?" "She just wants to talk things over," Grace replied, her eyes not meeting mine. "Talk things over?" I repeated, incredulous. "Grace, she doesn't want to talk. She wants to control you. She's been trying to control us since the beginning." Grace exhaled heavily and started fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I know she was out of line, but she's still my mom. She says she just wants to help us figure things out. "Help us," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Grace, she thinks I'm beneath you. How does undermining me and manipulating you help anything?" "She's just worried," Grace mumbled, her voice barely audible. "She doesn't want me to make a mistake." I looked at her, trying to make sense of the person I loved and the words coming out of her mouth. "You don't actually think going over there is a good idea, do you?" She hesitated. "I don't know, maybe if I spend some time with her she'll calm down. Maybe she'll see how much you mean to me." "Or maybe," I said, my voice rising, "she'll spend that time convincing you to walk away from me." Grace didn't respond. She just stared at the floor, and in that silence, I knew she'd already made up her mind. The next day, she packed a small bag and left. She told me it was only for a few days, that she just needed some space, but in my gut, I knew Linda had gotten exactly what she wanted: distance. At first, Grace texted like everything was fine. "Mom's being nice," she wrote one evening. "She hasn't brought up the ring or the argument." I didn't buy it for a second. Linda wasn't the type to let things go, not unless she had a strategy brewing. Sure enough, a few days later, the tone of Grace's messages started to shift. She still responded, but the warmth was gone. Her words felt filtered, careful. When I asked how she was doing, she'd give vague replies like, "Mom's just worried about us," or "She thinks we need to take more time to figure things out." What gnawed at me the most wasn't just Linda's constant interference, it was Grace's passive acceptance of it. I knew in my heart that she didn't truly agree with her mother, but she didn't challenge her either. It was like Linda had planted invisible chains around her, and Grace didn't know how or was too afraid to break free. One night, Grace called. Her voice was small, like she didn't want to be having the conversation at all. "Adam," she said quietly, "Mom thinks we should slow things down." I didn't even try to hide my frustration. Of course she does. What does that mean exactly, slow things down? "She thinks maybe we rushed into the engagement," Grace replied. "Maybe we should take some time apart to really figure out if we're ready." My heart dropped. I leaned back, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Grace, is that what you want, or is that what your mom wants?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I think maybe we do need some time. Everything's been so stressful lately. I forced myself to stay calm. "Of course it's been stressful, Grace. Your mom's been stirring the pot since I proposed, and instead of standing up to her, you're following her lead." "That's not fair," she said, her voice cracking. "She's just trying to protect me." "Protect you," I snapped. "Protect you from what? Being happy? From living a life outside of her control?" She didn't say anything. Silence stretched between us, until she finally whispered, "I just need more time." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Fine," I said flatly and hung up. The following days were hollow. Grace barely messaged me, and when she did, her words were short, almost transactional. The emotional distance between us was growing, and I didn't need a map to know who was behind it. Then, I got a call from Ethan, the same friend who'd introduced. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "I heard about the blow-up. One of Grace's friends told me." "Yeah," I muttered. "It's been a mess." Ethan paused. "Man, I hate to say it, but it sounds like her mom's doing everything she can to sabotage this." "No kidding," I said bitterly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I love Grace, but I can't keep wrestling her mother for control of this relationship, and Grace, she's not exactly stepping in to stop it." There was a moment of quiet before Ethan finally said what I hadn't been able to voice aloud. "You've got to figure out if Grace is actually on your side, because if she's not, then what's the point?" He was right, and it tore me up. I wanted so badly to believe Grace would come around, that she'd see what Linda was doing and put her foot down. But the longer she stayed at her parents' house, the harder it became to hold on to that hope. A few days later, Grace called again. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I don't know if I did the right thing by taking a break," she said. I don't know what else to do." Her words hit me harder than I expected, because in that moment I understood something painfully clear. Grace didn't know what to do because she had never really been allowed to decide for herself. Linda had been making her choices since day one. School, job, friends, everything. And now, when it mattered the most, she didn't know how to choose on her own. Grace couldn't break free. No matter how badly I wanted her to, no matter how many chances I gave her, she was still tangled in the same web she'd always known. I took a breath and said gently, "Grace, I love you, but I can't marry someone who lets their mother control every part of their life." There was silence on the other end of the line, heavy, dreadful, endless. "I need time," she finally whispered. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. My chest tightened. "Take all the time you need," I said, "but don't expect me to sit around while your mom decides the fate of our relationship." We hung up. I sat there staring at my phone like it would light up again, like she might call back. But deep down I knew. The relationship might not have ended with those words, but Linda had already done the damage. She'd driven a wedge so deep between Grace and me that we weren't even on the same page anymore. Maybe not even in the same book. A week passed. A long, cold, silent week. No calls, no texts. The space between us had stretched into something cavernous. Each day that went by, I thought less about how to fix it, and more about how much control Linda had over our lives. Grace wasn't acting like the woman I had fallen in love with. She was moving like a puppet, strings pulled taut by someone else's hands. Then I got a message from Grace. "Can we talk tonight? Mom says we should all sit down and figure this out." I stared at my phone, stunned. Mom says. Those two words told me everything I needed to know. Linda wasn't just interfering, she was orchestrating the whole thing. I clenched my jaw and typed back, "This isn't about your mom, it's about us. I'll come by, but only because I need to speak my truth." That evening, I drove to her parents' house, my stomach a knot of resentment and sadness. I didn't know exactly what would happen, but I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let Linda humiliate me again. Grace was already at the door when I arrived. Her face was pale, her hands wringing together like she was trying to squeeze strength from her fingers. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. "Let's just get this over with," I replied, brushing past her into the house. In the living room, Linda was seated like royalty on the couch, her posture straight, eyes sharp. Mike, her husband, sat beside her, his expression the portrait of quiet misery. Grace sat down next to her mother, leaving the armchair across from them for me. It felt like a setup, like I was on trial, and the jury was already set to convict. Linda spoke first, unsurprisingly. "Adam, we're glad you came. This has been a very emotional time for Grace, and we want to ensure she's making the right decisions for her future." I clenched my teeth. "This isn't about her future," I said. "It's about you controlling every aspect of her life." Linda's smile didn't waver, but her voice tightened. "I'm her mother. It's my responsibility to look out for her." "And I'm her fiancé," I snapped. "Or does that not count because I didn't spend enough money on a ring to meet your expectations?" Grace flinched at that, but said nothing. Linda, on the other hand, leaned forward, clearly prepared for this confrontation. "It's not about the price of the ring, Adam," she said, her voice tinged with superiority. "It's about what it symbolizes. A man who won't invest properly in an engagement ring doesn't take marriage seriously." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You mean a man who refuses to bankrupt himself just to impress you? That's what this is really about, isn't it? You want me to prove myself to you, not to Grace." Linda didn't even bother denying it. "If you want to be part of this family, you need to show you can provide the kind of life Grace deserves." "And what about what Grace wants?" I said, turning to look directly at her. "Does that matter to you at all?" Grace opened her mouth to respond, but Linda cut her off. "Of course I care," she said smoothly. "That's why I'm here, to guide her." "Guide," I repeated, my voice rising. "Linda, you don't guide her. You dictate her life. And Grace, you let her. You let her run the show, even when it comes to our relationship." Grace finally found her voice, though it trembled. "I just don't want to upset her." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice cracking with frustration. "Do my feelings mean anything? Or is this all about keeping your mom happy?" Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "It's not that simple, Adam." "It is," I said firmly. "You either want to marry me or you don't, and if you do, then you need to stand up to her." Linda scoffed. "So now you're giving her ultimatums? That's rich. You think you're doing her a favor by marrying her?" "I'm not giving her an ultimatum," I said, locking eyes with Linda. "I'm giving her a choice. She can choose a future with me, or she can keep living under your thumb. But I won't be part of this toxic cycle anymore." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Mike looked like he wished the couch would swallow him whole. Grace sat frozen, her expression torn, her body tense. Linda remained composed, but I could tell she was rattled. This wasn't how she'd planned it to go. "Grace," Linda said, finally turning to her daughter, "you need to think carefully. Marriage is a huge commitment, and Adam clearly isn't ready to make the necessary sacrifices." "Stop talking for her," I snapped. "Grace, this is your decision. What do you want?" Grace looked from me to her mother, then back at me again. Her lips parted, trembling, and then she spoke the three words I dreaded most. "I don't know." They hit me like a punch to the gut. In that moment I realized she wasn't going to choose me, not because she didn't love me, but because she didn't know how to love herself without her mother's permission. "I think we're done here," I said, standing up. "Grace, I love you, but I can't keep fighting your battles for you. I can't keep trying to prove myself to someone who refuses to see me. You need to figure out what you want, without your mom telling you what that should be." "Adam, wait," Grace said, reaching for my arm. I paused. I wanted to turn around, to believe she'd finally stand up and fight for us, but until she could do that, I knew I had to walk away. "I just need more time." Those words hit me like a dull blade. I shook my head slowly, the ache in my chest growing deeper. "You've had time, Grace, and all it's done is push us further apart." She didn't respond. Maybe she couldn't. The silence on the phone felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Then, Linda's voice broke the tension, not on the phone, but in my memory, echoing from the night before. I could still see her standing in that living room, arms crossed, her expression smug and unbothered. "Well, if you're leaving," she had said with venom-laced calm, "don't expect to come crawling back when you realize you've made a mistake." I had turned to her then, my voice as steady as I could make it despite the emotional storm inside me. The only mistake I made, I said, was thinking I could win Grace's love without your interference. I'm done playing this game, Linda. I hope one day Grace realizes just how much damage you've caused. And with that I walked out. No dramatic pause, no final glance over my shoulder, just silence and the sound of my footsteps carrying me out of a house that had become a battlefield. My heart was heavy, yes, but my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking back control of my own life. The following morning, my phone buzzed incessantly. Grace had sent a long message. I opened it, hopeful despite everything. But as I read through the text, that hope began to shrivel. It wasn't the kind of apology I needed, not really. It was a stream of soft explanations, blurred boundaries, and half-meant regret. I'm sorry you felt that way. Mom didn't mean to come off so harsh. And the worst part? I just need time to get her to understand where we're coming from. We. There was no we in that living room. There was me, standing alone, and Linda firing every shot she could. Grace wasn't beside me. She was in the audience, watching. I didn't reply, not right away, because I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to send back a single word no. No more excuses, no more passive acceptance, no more pretending that love could bloom in a war zone. But another part of me, the exhausted, broken part, didn't even want to engage anymore. By mid-afternoon, Grace started calling. I watched the phone light up with her name and let it ring out. She left a voicemail, her voice trembling. Adam, please, call me back. I want to talk about last night. I know it got out of hand, but I really believe we can work through this. I know we can. But could we? Every time I replayed that night in my mind, all I could see was her silence. I'd stood there, vulnerable, fighting for both of us, and she hadn't said a word. She'd let her mom control the narrative, control the tone, control the outcome. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was floating through someone else's story. Grace kept reaching out. Her texts oscillated between regret and rationalization. Mom just wants what's best for me. She's always been like this, but she'll come around. She really believed that, or maybe she just wanted. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had seen who Linda was, and I'd seen how little Grace resisted. This wasn't about one fight. It was about a pattern, a life lived under someone else's thumb. One evening, Ethan dropped by. He'd heard bits of the story from mutual friends, but he wanted the unfiltered version. So, he said, plopping onto my couch, you really called off the engagement? Yeah, I said, handing him a beer. I couldn't do it anymore. Her mom was running the whole show. Grace wasn't even trying to take the wheel. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You sure she wasn't just caught off guard? I mean, that sounds intense. Maybe she needed more time to figure things out. That's the problem, I said, sitting across from him. This isn't new. Linda's always been in control. Grace just lets it happen. She doesn't push back. She doesn't even try. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, that's rough, man, but you really think it's over? You two were solid before all this. Were we, though? I asked. Or was I just ignoring all the red flags because I loved her? Ethan didn't have an answer, and honestly, neither did I. A few days later, the whispers started. I got a call from Sarah, a friend of mine who also happened to be close with Grace. She spoke in hushed tones like she was revealing state secrets. You know Linda's been talking about you, right? I sighed. Of course she has. What's she saying now? She's telling people you're too cheap to provide for Grace, that you embarrassed her family by walking out. She's making it sound like you're just some broke loser who bailed because you couldn't handle the pressure? I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. Of course she is. Linda can't accept that someone stood up to her. She needs a villain. I'm just the easiest target. Honestly, some people are seeing through it, Sarah added. Everyone knows how controlling she is, but I thought you should know what's being said. Thanks, I said. I appreciate it. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger because Linda wasn't just sabotaging Grace's life. She was trying to ruin mine too. But relief because, deep down, I was done fighting. Let her talk. Let her build whatever narrative made her feel powerful. I was out. A week passed. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It was Grace. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, and she clutched her hands tightly in her lap as she sat on my couch. I'm sorry, she said after a long, painful pause. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I know I should have. It's so hard with my mom. I get it, I said gently, sitting across from her. But Grace, this isn't just about your mom anymore. This is about us. I need a partner who stands with me, who has my back. And that night, you didn't. Her eyes welled again. I know, and I hate that I froze. I wanted to say something. I did. but it's like she always knows how to shut me down. She's been doing it for so long I didn't even realize how deep it went. I nodded. You weren't just silent, Grace, you were gone. I stood there alone. She looked at me, eyes full of regret. I don't want to lose you, Adam. I don't want to lose you either, I said, but I can't walk back into a relationship where I'm the only one fighting for us. That night showed me something I can't unsee. I need to change, she said quietly. I know that now. I didn't respond immediately. Change is a promise, not a guarantee, and this time, I wasn't ready to make any more promises either. I know, she whispered, her voice barely holding together. I know I let you down, but I love you, Adam. I don't want to lose you. My heart cracked a little hearing her say it, words I'd been aching to hear for weeks. I love you too, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. But Grace, love isn't enough, not if you're not willing to fight for us. She stared at me, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Her mouth opened like she wanted to speak, but no words came. Your mom is always going to be a part of your life, I continued, trying to stay calm. But if you can't stand up to her now, when we're just engaged, what's going to happen when we're married, when we have kids, when real decisions need to be made? Grace still didn't answer. Her shoulders trembled as the silence deepened between us. Grace, I said gently, you need to really think about this, about everything, not just for me, for yourself. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life living under your mother's shadow? She nodded slowly. You're right, she murmured. But I don't know how to change. You have to figure that out, I said, trying to keep the sadness out of my voice. But I can't be the one to do it for you. That night she left. No final plea, no last-minute promises. Just a soft goodbye, the sound of the door closing behind her, and the suffocating realization that this was probably the last time we'd speak as a couple. Few days later, Linda sent me a text. Short, smug, and exactly what I expected. If you just apologize, we could all move past this. I didn't even think twice. I deleted it without responding. I had walked away from Grace and her mother not because I stopped caring, but because I finally accepted that love alone couldn't carry the weight of 3 people, especially when one of them was actively sabotaging everything the other 2 were trying to build. I thought that would be the end of it. I expected to go on with my life, focus on healing, and put that entire chapter behind me. But life doesn't always let you close the book that easily. A few weeks after I returned the engagement ring, I got a call from Sarah, one of our mutual friends. Hey, she said cautiously, you're not going to believe what Linda's up to now. I sighed, already exhausted just hearing her name. What now? She's trying to set Grace up with some rich guy she met through a charity event, Sarah said. He's in his 40s, apparently owns a bunch of property, and drives some ridiculous sports car. That sounds exactly like her type, I muttered bitterly. A fat wallet and no soul. Grace isn't into it, though, Sarah added quickly. She's told Linda she's not interested, but you know how Linda is. She won't take no for an answer. It didn't surprise me. Linda had always treated Grace like a pawn, something to maneuver, to sacrifice, to position for her own gain. A month later, I ran into Ethan at the gym. After catching up, he casually mentioned, Hey, did you hear Grace moved out? I nearly dropped the weights I was holding. Wait, what? Yeah, Ethan said. Apparently Linda kicked her out. I stared at him. She what? From what I heard, Grace finally stood her ground about that rich guy Linda wanted her to date. She refused to even meet him, and Linda completely lost it. Told her if she wasn't going to listen, she wasn't welcome in the house anymore. Wow, I said, shaking my head. I mean, I always knew Linda was controlling, but that's another level. Ethan shrugged. Honestly, might be the best thing that ever happened to her. I wanted to agree, really, I did. But part of me just felt sorry for Grace. She'd spent her entire life trying to win her mother's approval, only to get discarded like a failed project when she didn't fall in line. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing little things about Grace, snippets passed along through friends. She'd moved into a small apartment in the downtown area and was looking for a new job, something in the art world finally. She was selling some of her work online, doing freelance gigs, trying to build a life that looked a little more like the one she'd always dreamed of. But it wasn't all progress. Apparently Linda wasn't done making her life difficult. She'd been bad-mouthing Grace to anyone who would listen, friends, extended family, even old neighbors. She's telling everyone, I did everything for her and this is how she repays me, one of Grace's cousins told me. She's even trying to cut her off financially, says if Grace struggles enough she'll come crawling back. That sounded exactly like Linda, using money like a leash. But from what I heard, Grace wasn't crawling back. She was surviving, struggling, yes, but on her own terms. Then, one day, my phone lit up with a message that made my heart skip. It was from Grace. "Hey, can we talk? I really need someone right now." I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but instead I replied, "What's going on?" She called almost instantly. Her voice shook when she spoke. "Adam, I'm so sorry. For everything." I stayed quiet, waiting. "You were right about my mom," she continued. "She kicked me out because I wouldn't meet the guy she wanted me to date. She said I was ungrateful, that I didn't deserve her support." I sighed, the familiar cocktail of frustration and sadness bubbling up again. "Grace, I'm sorry you're going through this. I really am. But I don't know what you expect from me." "I don't expect anything," she said quickly. I know I messed up. I should have defended you. I should have stood up to her. And I didn't. But I'm trying now. I'm trying to fix things. I'm trying to figure out my life. Her voice broke again. "I just need someone to talk to." I closed my eyes, leaned back, and exhaled. I didn't have the answers. I didn't know where this conversation was heading, but I also knew I didn't want to see her fall apart completely. "Grace," I said softly, "I'm here, but you need to understand, I can't be your crutch. You have to learn to stand on your own." She didn't argue, she just whispered, "I know." "I'm glad you're finally starting to see the truth," I said, keeping my voice calm though my heart was racing. "But the thing is, when it mattered, you didn't choose me. When I needed you to stand by me, you let your mom drive a wedge between us, and now I can't be the one who picks up the pieces, not anymore." There was a long pause on the line. For a moment I thought she might hang up or cry. Instead, her voice came through, quiet but steady. "I understand," she said. I don't know who else to turn to." Those words hurt more than I expected. For so long I had wanted to be her person, the one she could lean on, count on, trust. I would have given anything for her to come to me when she needed strength, but now, it just felt like too little, too late. "You'll figure it out," I said softly, meaning every word. "You're stronger than you think, but this is something you need to do for yourself. You've got to stand on your own." And with that, we said goodbye. Months passed. Time, as it does, softened the sting of everything that had happened. Through mutual friends, I heard that Grace had finally taken a big step. She'd gone no contact with Linda. Apparently, after being kicked out, she found her footing. She'd stopped trying to win her mother's approval and started focusing on her own life. That silence from Grace must have been the wake-up call Linda never saw coming. I don't know if Linda ever apologized or if she even tried to make things right, but if she did, I doubt their relationship would ever go back to what it once was. As for me, I moved forward. I wasn't rushing into anything new, not dating seriously yet, but I was learning more about myself, what I wanted, what I needed. One thing I knew for sure, I would never settle for someone who allowed others to dictate the course of their life. Looking back, I don't regret calling off the engagement. It hurt like hell, but it was the right decision. Grace needed to find her freedom, and I needed to find peace. Both of us had to do that on our own.